Thank you. So if you've been on a website recently, which I hope includes most of you, you've probably seen a screen like this, right? In 2012, that's still the dominant way that people log into websites. Now, there are a number of things that are wrong with the very simple username and password scheme that people use. A big problem is security. If you've been following the news recently, you will have seen a number of high-profile companies apologizing publicly for losing passwords from their users after getting hacked. Now, I could pick on any one of those, but the reality is that storing passwords in a database is actually really hard, right? It is a liability if you have a web application, and it's easy to get something wrong. Now, of course, you're all Python developers, which means you're all smart. So you know that you have to do a couple of rounds of vcrypt, or even better, scrypt, for your passwords when you hash them. You use per user source, and you already use a site secret that's outside your database. Now, you know all of this, right? But let's be honest about the kinds of passwords that users are going to store or going to use on your websites, right? This is the top 500 passwords. The big one there is an actual password. It is the most popular password. So they're gonna pick really shitty passwords. So some people will be able to crack them or guess them or whatever. Now, what's worse is that when LinkedIn gets hacked, are you going to ask your users to reset their passwords? Because they're using the same passwords that they were using on LinkedIn, right? So it's a bit of a problem. Another problem has to do with conversion rate. Now, it's really typical when you look at metrics to see something like this. Lots of people starting the sign-up process, and not as many finishing the sign-up process. Now, there's lots of reasons for something like this, and if you run a website, you probably know a bit more about it, about your specific circumstance. But a large part of this is often has to do with forcing users to pick another username, another password, right? People don't use password managers. Now, I know we all do, right? We all use very smart schemes for passwords, and we save them in our browsers, encrypted, blah, blah, blah. But the average user is not that sophisticated. Mozilla has done user research on this, and no, users don't use fancy password managers. So this gap there, when they give up because they don't want to sign up to your site because they just don't want to remember yet another password, this is costing you real money. So it's another problem with this scheme. Now, there are existing solutions that are not usernames and passwords. One very cool one that not many people use is client-side SSL certificates. Now, it's just like the server-side SSL certificates that you use to prove that an HTTPS website is the one it claims to be, except that this is issued to a user, not a website, and it's stored in the browser. When you visit a site that needs it, the browser sends it over, and you're logged in. It's just like magic. It's really great, sort of worldwide SSO. But can I get a quick show of hands? How many people have used a client cert in the last week to log into a website? That's quite a few people. That's impressive. Okay, last month. Same people? Okay, last year? Okay, a few more hands. But not many, right? And we're all geeks. And I'm sure there's a couple of people that probably have CA cert accounts in the room. But anyways, that solution is not used very much. Lots of usability problems. The support in browser is not that great. It's hard to set up on the server side. So let's not talk about it too much because nobody uses it. Now, this is a solution that's a lot more popular. You outsource control of the identity of your users to a centralized authority. Now, Microsoft tried that back in the days with Passport. It bombed. People freaked out at the thought that Microsoft might become the gatekeeper of the internet. But somehow things have changed, and now it's okay when it's these companies. Now, it's not really okay because you're cutting out users that don't want a LinkedIn account or a Facebook account or a Twitter account. And also, you may not want to give what's most precious about your company as your customers list. You may not want another company, for-profit company, to be in control of that. Maybe you do. Maybe that's okay for your business. Maybe that's acceptable risk. But it's certainly unacceptable for the open web to have two private for-profit companies be the gatekeepers of the internet. So what about OpenID? It's got open in the name. Surely that's a good thing. OpenID is great because it did bring the idea of decentralization back into the realm of web identity. Unfortunately, hasn't had the adoption that people wish it had. There's various reasons for this, one of which is usability. Users have a hard time figuring out how it works, what it means. It's actually hard to implement. There's lots of really shitty IDPs out there that will bring up your support costs if you start using OpenID. But the main problem why we at Mozilla couldn't really get behind this is privacy. OpenID has a terrible flaw that's not fixable, that at the protocol, because it's at the protocol level, basically your identity provider gets a trail of every website you're going to. And that to us is unacceptable. So we built something else, something called Persona, and that's what I want to talk about today. Now Persona is distributed, it's not centralized. It's as decentralized as you want it to be. You can be your own IDP if you want. It's privacy sensitive. The identity provider does not have a trail of every place where you're going. It cannot have a trail by design. It's simple both for users, because we're really focused on user experience. We have a full-time user experience designer on our team. And it's also very simple for developers, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And finally, like with everything that Mozilla does, it's open source. OK, so how does it actually work? The basic idea is verified email addresses. So your username becomes your email address, and your password, instead of a password, what you provide is a proof that you own an email address. So email and proof. If you understand this, you understand Persona. It's as simple as that. OK, so how do you get a proof that you own an email address? You get a proof by going to your email address provider. So if the email address provider supports it, you go there, you log in, say, to your webmail, you're using your username and password. If it's Gmail, then you might be using your two-factor auth or whatever. Then your browser generates a public and a private key specific to that email account. It sends the public key over to your email provider. Now that happens transparently, you don't have to do anything. And at that point, the email provider returns a signed copy of your public key back to your browser. Because it knows who you are already, you're logged into that website. So what you have in your browser at this point is this, a signed statement from your provider that you own that email address. Now what can you do with this? You can take it to a website like 123done.org that uses Persona for logins. And the way that works is that you click on the sign-in button at the top there. That brings up a dialog box which shows you all of the emails that you have proofs for in your browser. So I have a certificate for these two emails. I'm going to pick the second one and click the sign-in button. And boom, you're in. No passwords. If you have already that signed statement in your browser, you don't need a password to get logged into the website. Now, how would it work if a third-party site, say Wikipedia, wanted to add support for Persona to their system, right? They wanted to let people log in using Persona. Well, if I visit Wikipedia and try to log in using Persona, I'm going to send Wikipedia an assertion. The assertion is very simple. It's a bundle of three things. The signed certificate that we got from the email provider, an audience field, and an expiry. First thing that Wikipedia will check is that audience field. Audience field meaning it's basically the URL of the website where you're trying to log in. Now the reason why you want this in an assertion is that if you didn't have that, then Wikipedia could actually turn around, use the assertion I just gave to it, and then log as myself into another website. But that won't work because the assertion is specific to Wikipedia, and that other website would see that it's the wrong audience and would refuse entry at that point. Next thing is to check the expiry time. Assertions are valid in Persona for 2 minutes, so they're very, very short-lived. And if that works, then the next thing you do is you check the signature on the cryptographic certificate that you sent as part of your assertion. How does that work? Well, Wikipedia would get the public key from Gmail. It's the same public key for every user, so you don't have to reveal at that point who is trying to log in to your website. You're just getting a generic public key. And in fact, you probably don't even need to get the public key if it's something like Gmail or Yahoo or Hotmail, because it's very likely that someone else would have logged in before you, and Wikipedia has just cached the public key. So in this case, Gmail wouldn't even have an accurate count of how many users, Wikipedia users, use Gmail. And once you've checked all of that, then that's all you need to do. You can log the user in using whatever normal mechanism you use. So setting a cookie, creating a session, whatever you do. From there on, it's whatever the site does normally. Okay, so how much work is it to do what I've just shown, right? How much code do you need to write? The answer is about 75 lines of code. That is a very minimal Python CGI that I wrote, 75 lines, and that included HTML, the client-side JavaScript code, as well as the back-end Python code. So it's really very little code. Let's look at that site again and look at what sort of code you would expect to see. Now, when I click, first of all, when I load this page, one thing that happens is that this is in the header. So there's an external piece of JavaScript from persona.org that gets loaded from the header. That's the first thing you need to do. Then you need to run the navigator.id.watch setup function. This does 3 things. First thing, it tells Persona whether or not there is a user currently logged into your site and who it is. So in this case, either an email address like this or null. Like right now on that site, there's nobody logged in, so null would indicate that. Then you have an onLogin function that you need to specify. This is what gets called when the user hands an assertion over to the site. I'll just skip that for a bit and come back to it. The last one is a logout function. So this is how, if Persona wants to log a user out of your site, how does it work? Typically, you redirect to the logout page, and then the backend will kill the session and remove the cookie, something like that. So this is what this is doing. It's just a redirect. But you do whatever you need to do on your site. So, okay, now if I click on a sign-in button, what happens is that the browser will call navigator.id.request with no parameters. So you're free to use whatever sign-in button you want, or link, or whatever, but you need to call this function. Because that's a function that brings up the dialog with the list of certificates that are already in the browser. So I'm going to pick the same email that I used before, click sign in, and that's when the login function gets called with the user's assertion. Okay, so what do you do with the assertion? Well, this is how we do it in jQuery. You can do it in many ways. But this is basically just taking the assertion from the user and passing it back here to the backend at this URL /login. And then once we're done, we just redirect back to the homepage. Okay, simple enough. Now the important thing here is that you do need to verify assertions server-side, because you can't trust the client to do that properly. So you just post it back to your own website. And this is the client-side code. So very simple, that's all you need to do. It uses the Python request module, but you can use whatever you want to do this. But the important part here is that you're taking the assertion from the user and sending it to verifier.login.persona.org with the audience field that you expect. What you get out of this post to persona.org is a blob of JSON that will say either status OK, if it's a valid assertion, or it'll say status failed if it's invalid. If it's valid, you will then get the email at the bottom right? Email francois@mozilla.com. If it's invalid, you don't get the email, you get an error message instead. So when you get that, then you can just go ahead and log the user in because the assertion is valid and everything is fine. The last piece, of course, is what happens when the user clicks the logout button at the top there. And it's quite simple. You just call this function navigator.id.logout, no parameters, and then the user will be logged out fully, like this. And that calls, of course, the callback that I mentioned earlier, the onLogout function. So that's it. That's all you need to do to add persona support into your application. Like I've actually shown you literally all the code. Load an external JavaScript file, set up the login and logout callbacks, add the buttons, and then verify the assertion server-side. Now, what's the status of Persona? How decentralized is it right now, for example? It's a tricky question because when you're dealing with decentralized services, it's really hard to get started. If you want to start fully distributed right from the start, well, it's probably not going to work. And the reason for that is that you need the cooperation of a whole lot of people, and every single one of them will ask you, well, how many people are using this? You know, how many IDPs do you have? How many? All of these questions. And if you're waiting on everybody to get together and just start, then it'll be a little bit like IPv6, right? Everybody will wait until they're forced to do it. So what we've done is and I think that's one of the most clever things about Persona, is that we've built centralized fallbacks for a lot of things to help with this initial adoption thing. First place where we build a centralized fallback is with the identity provider. Now, what you want to see normally is this. You have an email address like francois@id.me, and you want to see assertions and certificates that are issued by id.me, right? Issuer id.me. That's the ideal case. The domain issues certificates for its users. What we've built, however, is a fallback IDP to work around the fact that not all domains right now, in fact, very little domains right now, support Persona natively. So what you're going to see if you, instead of seeing this, when you use a domain that doesn't have, well, ironically enough, this one doesn't have Persona support yet, but it will very soon. The code is there, it's just not rolled out yet. What you're going to see instead is this, issuer_login.persona.org. Okay? That means that persona.org is vouching for my ownership of that email address. Now, how can we do this if we're not related to these domains? We do what everybody else on the internet does to prove that, to check that you own an email address. We send you an email at registration time, and it has a unique link with a token in it. When you click on it, that proves to us that you own that email address, right? Everybody else does that. So at that point, we can sign certificates on your behalf. If your email provider does not support Persona natively, if it does, then our fallback does not get used. So right now, we support all email providers. They all work with Persona because of that fallback. Now, the second thing is browser support. Ultimately, what we want to see is this. Navigator.id.whatever will be part of browsers. It will be a standard feature, and everything will be great. Now, right now, there are no browsers that support this natively. So what did we do? We did this. That JavaScript file is actually a full JavaScript implementation of Persona that works on all reasonable browsers. And I'll get to that in a minute. So what this means is we don't have to wait for browser vendors to actually get around and implement things before we can start using it. It does support all modern browsers. That's what we support right now. And we actually test regularly with all of these, and it works really well. So again, that's a neat thing about Persona. You don't have to wait until everybody gets together and implements the standard. It works right now, And as soon as browsers add native support, then the JavaScript stuff will just not get used anymore. Also works on iOS and Android on all of these browsers. Now, the last step where we have a centralized piece is with the assertion verification. Now, you will have noticed that we use verifier.persona.org for verifying assertions. That is, of course, a single sort of point of failure, a single server that people use. The idea is that people will validate assertions themselves in the future, but we want to make it really easy for people to get started. So this is why we provide the verifier. In Python, you're lucky because you can already use a library that will do the verification entirely on your side without problems. Now, if you use Browser ID, I should have mentioned Browser ID is the name of the protocol behind Persona, and that project used to be called Browser ID. Now the project is called Persona. But there's lots of things that are called Browser ID because they refer to the protocol. Currently, we do suggest that people use the online verifier that we provide, just because we're still changing the details of the crypto underneath the underneath the service. And if you use the online verifier, you're not going to see any change. That's going to be stable. If you verify assertions yourself, you may need to make adjustments, or you may need to just keep that library up to date. In other words, Persona is open for business. I mean, you can use it on your site now. It's ready. It's used in production in a lot of places. It's used on most Mozilla properties now, and it would be great if you joined us. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to grab me anytime during a conference. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. And especially if you can tell me if there's anything we could do that would make it easier on you or would make it more likely to be adopted by you or whatever, please talk to me. That's exactly the kind of feedback we want to get. We're very committed to making this a part of the open web, and we'd like it to succeed. I will be at the sprints on Monday and Tuesday, so if you want any help adding support for it on your site or your application, I'll be more than happy to do this. And the last thing I'm going to point out is this thing here. If you're using Django, there's an auth plugin already for Browser ID Persona, so you don't even need to write any code. You just turn it on and it works, and it's brilliant. So are there any questions?
Yeah, if you can wait for the microphone. We're just going to run it around. Yeah, it's about 10 minutes for questions.
So it looks pretty good, but my first question about identity really is that people have multiple passwords for a reason to have different levels of security. So for a banking website, you're going to have a different identity to your social identity. So how are you going to solve that problem?
The quick answer to this is that you can use different email addresses. You can have a high security one that you only use for your bank with a different password, and you can have a low security one if you want that you use in other places. That's one of the reasons why we went with email addresses. I think people know how to provide fake email addresses for websites. Well, like fake as in you just created one on Gmail and you've never used it anywhere else, or you put a little plus sign with other stuff afterwards. So you can all do that with Persona.
Hi there. You went through a lot of detail about what it's like to implement as a developer, and I understand it's a developer conference, so it's kind of stuff we want to know. But I kind of felt that we're missing the warts and all version of what it's actually like for someone to use a site that uses this that hasn't used it before. Because things like OpenID, it's not just hard to implement for developers, it's just annoying for users as well. And some of that stuff felt a little bit the same as OpenID might end up being, as in what do you get confronted with when you first hit a site that uses this, and what's that kind of, that initial rollout, okay, let's try and use Persona. And I don't know, I just got the feeling that I didn't get enough of a description of what that looks like.
Thanks, that's very good feedback. I mean, I can describe it in sort of broad strokes. You hit the first, so if you don't have a Persona account, you'll need to create one at some point, right? Actually, that's not entirely true. That's only true if your email provider doesn't support Persona already. If it does, then it's a different flow. Right now we have sort of small people that are playing with it, and we have ID.me, which is a demo one that we have. But very soon we'll be rolling out a sort of proxy system that will enable anybody with a Hotmail, Gmail, and Yahoo account to not have to have a Persona account. So they will just log in with their Gmail password. But the normal flow, if you have, say, I don't know, a Kogan.com email address, is you hit the site that uses Persona, you click sign in, and then you type in your email address, it'll say, hey, I've never seen you before, please I'll create a new account for you, so you enter your password in that form twice, right? Typical thing. Then you get an email, the confirmation link that I showed. You click that, and then you sign in automatically. Your browser will redirect automatically to the home page of the site you were trying to sign into.
The password was a Persona password?
That's a new. Like if you don't have support natively in your email provider, then you have to pick a Persona password. Yeah. But so that's the flow currently. We're constantly changing it to make it better. So if anybody has feedback about what they see working, this is based on sort of experiments that we've made with people.
If you wanted to use it, say, as an enterprise single sign-on type solution, presumably you'd want to restrict it to just that one sort of email domain. You'd have to implement the email part.
Yep. So that's very easy to do.
That's
when you receive the assertion, you check the domain of the email address. If it's not part of the domains that you have in your whitelist, you don't let the user in.
So doing the email part is hard or not hard?
It's easy, but it's outside of Persona. Like when you receive the assertion, you verify the assertion, and that essentially extracts the email address out of it. So at that point in your application, you can look at the email and see, oh, that's not actually an email from the company domain. I'm not going to let the user in. So you can easily do that yourself. And there are people doing that, exactly that.
So does this work outside the browser? Can I write a command line tool that uses this, or would you still want to use OAuth for that?
It doesn't currently work on the command line, but I actually want to play with it and do it for testing purposes. But what we would need to do there is we would need to commit to. I have a way of doing it that I thought of, but we would need to commit to that specific API. If there's enough demand, we might do it. But right now, the first thing we're doing is the web stuff.
What's required for implementing the issuer side?
So if you want to add, if you're
offering a mail service and
yep.
you want to set up that side is what's required for that?
So there's the first thing is you need to expose to the world that you support Persona. Currently, so you're on the domain, you just serve a file out of over HTTPS out of the .well-known directory. That file will have your public key. And then basically you have those two provisioning endpoints that you need to respond to because Persona will actually ping you on those ones. One of them is like sort of getting an assertion for the user, and the other one is a login form that we will put it as like an iframe or something like that that will display to the user. So if you provide those two things, you can do that. If you're interested in that, come and talk to me. We have a demo IDP that so obviously open source and stuff that you can steal from.
The code's available.
And do it.
Cool.
But yeah, like I think that's a very good point. I mean, a lot of ISPs could benefit from offering like awesome sort of native Persona support to their users.
Yep, sounds good.
There's a question there?
Yeah, there's time for one more question, so...
All right.
Yeah.
We have one more.
This side of the room, because this one.
I think that, well... Okay, yeah, sure.
I have a comment and a question. So I tried out Persona, so I went to the Mozilla Persona site, and they took me to openphoto.me. And I tried in there. I went to sign in with Persona. And first of all, the phrasing was really weird. So at first, when I went to sign into Persona, asked for my email, I typed it in, then it said, give us a password. And it didn't make it clear what password it wanted. It kind of sounded like it wanted my Gmail password, because it didn't say create new password, and there was no confirm password box either. And I wasn't comfortable typing in my Gmail password on a non-Gmail page. So I put in a one-time thing, and that went through, and sort of then that logged in, and I still haven't gotten a verification email of any sort, although the login was successful. And so that's my comment, that that process was a bit weird. And my question is, when does that password come into play? When will I ever be asked for that password?
So that password will show up if you clear your cookies, for example, in your browser, and you try to log in again to that same site or any site that uses Persona, then when you type in your email, instead of asking you for 2 passwords, like the confirmation and stuff, it will ask you just to log in again to unlock, to basically get the certs back into your browser. So as long as you keep your cookies, then you're going to be able to log into Persona. But if they expire or you clear them, then you'll have to type in the password again.
And how come it was comfortable enough to sort of make a successful login without verifying anything about the email?
I'll have to see what you did, because I'm not quite sure exactly.
Verify the email. Why have a password anyway?
It's there.
Once it's actually working, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want to verify your email every single time you're trying to log into a website, though. Sure, I guess we could do that. That would be a trade-off. But if people use multiple devices, that might be pretty annoying because they'll have to constantly click on email links.
Yeah, we're going to have to cut it off there. But if you want to speak to Francois later on, you can talk about that. Yeah, I'd like to thank Francois for coming today and giving us this great talk. I was actually quite interested in it as well. So, yeah, no, I also have to. Also have some coffee and a nice coffee mug to go with it. This is our African swallow blend, which you've all been trying out, in the bar there. So yeah, there's the coffee and there's a coffee mug. And yeah, let's thank Francois.